has been an astronaut with the CSA since 2009. He's an experienced Royal Canadian Air Force CF-18 fighter pilot, and last year became the first Canadian to be entrusted with leading a NASA astronaut class. Welcome. There he is. Test pilot and fighter pilot with experience on more than 25 aircraft. Joshua Kutrek was recruited last year. He is now in basic astronaut training in Jeremy's class. Jenny Seide-Gibbons is an engineer and was assistant professor at the University of Cambridge before she was recruited to be an astronaut last year. Unfortunately, she couldn't get out of her training, but she is joining us live from NASA. Hi, Jenny. Before we get started, we are going to watch a short video from the first Canadian to participate in an ISS assembly mission. She is now the Governor General of Canada, Julie Payette.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello everybody. I know you're gathered at the University of Ottawa avec tous mes collègues astronautes canadiens. Je vous salue. Je suis présentement à Terre-Neuve en route pour Goose Bay à bord d'un avion des forces canadiennes de l'escadron 412. I really wish I was with you, but right now the duty calls. So I hope you have a great panel, a great discussion. Amusez-vous bien. Puis à bientôt. Au revoir.
Finally, the current commander of the ISS, Andrew Fussell, is also Canadian. In fact, he's a dual Canadian-American citizen who has studied at Queen's University in Kingston. His wife is here in the audience with us today. So we have so many brilliant minds. My job really is to just move things along and keep time. Let's dive right into the conversation, and we will have a little bit of time at the end for your questions. So let's start with an icebreaker of sorts. There are different generations of astronauts on stage right now. Of course, space exploration has changed over the past few decades. Would any of you trade places? Would you like to fly the new vehicles?
Yes.
Anyone else want to jump in there?
Yeah, the space flight is an absolutely fantastic privilege to do, and also an amazing adventure. So it'd be fantastic to trade places.
You know, it's always a great time to be an astronaut. The question is, will the first Canadian to walk on the moon, are they sitting on the stage, or are they in the audience watching?
Right here. We've got some kids waving over in the corner, just so you can see.
Yeah, we had, on my first mission, we had an ohms burn that was equivalent to the burn that goes to the moon. And I can remember Mission Control telling us, you guys had a really good burn. And the commander and I looking at each other saying, yes, but it was in the wrong direction.
And also, we encourage your stories along the way. Even if I don't get to them in the exact question, feel free to just jump in. We want this to be as spontaneous as possible. My next question is, this week Elon Musk announced his first paying passenger to the moon. Musk and many other entrepreneurs are trying to change the space landscape and inspiring a lot of business people with great ideas. We hear a lot about how space is changing. New space. What does this mean?
I think the biggest change, or actually the greatest impediment, has been just accessing space itself. Space flight is younger than most of us on stage, in fact. When a lot of us were born, no one had ever flown in space. It's still a brand new technology, but it's been improving in leaps and bounds. And what SpaceX and Blue Origin, what those folks are doing is evolving the access to space. And if you can make access to space cheaper and safer, then it radically changes the industry. So it's a natural and really important step, but one that's going to open the doors more for Jeremy and Josh and Jenny and all the other Canadian astronauts that follow.
And I would add that in the early days of the space program, only governments were willing to take the risk of putting money into developing a space capability. So it's very encouraging that people like Elon Musk and others are now taking money out of their pockets and participating in our advances with respect to space. so that it's no longer just governments that are funding it because of its complexity and risk, but that private citizens are ready to invest themselves.
You know, the future of space is about exploration, absolutely no question. It's also about economic opportunity. Right now, we have a $350 billion global budget in space, of which the Canadian portion is $5 billion. By 2030, it's estimated this will be a $1.1 trillion opportunity for all of us. There will be people in this room who will fly in space in the future as commercial space travelers, and that's really exciting seeing Canada part of that.
I think I would throw in as well, I think that's true. Commercialization is a great thing. To me, it's indicative of the huge opportunities that are available in the near future. But I also think it's important for exploration because as that access gets easier, it allows the agencies, NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, to move on to other things, the harder things, the long distance exploration, the leaving Earth's orbit. And in the next few years, we're going to see these agencies doing stuff like that that's never been done before. So commercialization is great for that because it lets us go on to harder challenges.
I do want to give Jenny a chance to say hello and maybe answer this question. We have a question specifically for you later on as well. But your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, hello to everyone. I wish that I could be there to join you today, but as was mentioned, I couldn't get away from training. I'm doing biomedical basics this week at the Johnson Space Center, but I was able to sneak out and say hello. I want to echo what was already said in that I think that commercial space and this sort of new era that we're entering presents a lot of excitement and a lot of opportunity, and it's bold. I mean, it's the goals that people are setting and these private companies are setting in collaboration with government entities is really exciting. And it reminds me of that quote that says, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir the blood of men and women." I just think that sums up space so well because that's what it's all about. I mean, it's this inspiring exploration, and it gets people interested, inspires them to do new things. So when I think of the new era and what's coming in space, I think of those opportunities.
So NASA and its partners are talking about next steps in space exploration, like returning to the moon as one example, and sending humans to Mars. How do you see Canada fitting into these plans?
I can start on that one. What's really important for people to understand is new space affects this. What Josh was saying is correct, that this frees up government to go further and explore deeper into space, but this isn't a return to the moon like in Apollo days. This is about reusable infrastructure. You got to think of this more like a railway across Canada or a hub in deep space. That's what the future is how do we build something that we will use forever. We'll reuse it over and over again. We won't throw everything away. And we're seeing this already in commercial space. We now live in a world where rockets blast off and then they land. It's a pretty significant visual of what the future looks like. Things we take to the moon in the future will come back and be refueled and reused again. And that's significant. You asked how Canada will contribute. Well, there's a lot of potential in Canada. One of them is on your $5 bill. This is an area of expertise for Canada, Canadian robotics. But we're not going to just do what we did in the past. We're going to take it to the next level. We're going to start to use artificial intelligence. As we do things deeper in space, we have to change the way we do them. And that's just one example. Maybe someone else could add, Dave and Bob. Actually, Bob, you've been working a lot on the medical.
I had the opportunity to spend 6 months aboard the International Space Station. And if you'd asked me before I flew, what's the best thing about the station, I would have said that it's a wonderful platform for doing research and weightlessness that you can't do on the ground. But after I got home, when someone asked me the question, I said, the best thing about the International Space Station is it's international. It's brought together 5 space agencies representing 18-ish countries, some of them who are former Cold War enemies, to pursue a common vision about extending human capability in space, about doing something creative in the area of discovery and innovation, and to inspire humanity, the public, to take on impossible challenges. So, Canada has certain little niche areas of expertise, and we will contribute them, robotics, healthcare potentially, but we need to be part of this international consortium because the world is all one, and we're all connected, and Canada has to play a role in getting that message out.
Yeah, imagine if, like this new project that is being planned right now, the Gateway, imagine that Canada plays a leadership role in that. imagine what we can showcase. We're already good at robotics. We're excellent at instrumentation. Just to digress, almost every weather satellite in the States has an instrument at its heart, which is Canadian. So if we can play that leadership role on the external robotics and the internal robotics on the Gateway project, you'll see that we'll be able to showcase what we know. And what we know is robotics, expert systems, AI associated with robotics, and we are so good at that we would be a natural leader to take that on. And it would be very exciting if we were allowed that opportunity to do that.
Oui, j'ajouterais que vous savez que le Canada a été le troisième pays dans l'espace avec notre satellite Alouette en 1962. Alors on est des pionniers en robotique, en communication, en observation de la Terre. Et souvent c'est parce qu'on a travaillé avec d'autres pays, les États-Unis, l'Agence spatiale européenne, le Japon, même la Russie. On a travaillé avec beaucoup d'autres pays. Et aujourd'hui, je pense que c'est important qu'on fasse partie de cette nouvelle avancée vers d'autres parties de notre système solaire, la Lune, Mars. Le Canada a beaucoup d'expertise à offrir et ce serait dommage si on ne faisait pas partie de cette nouvelle avancée dans le domaine de l'espace.
And maybe you can pick up on that in terms of Canada's expertise and just how we fit into these plans.
I think it's been said we have a lot to contribute. The world of spacefaring nations would like us and needs that contribution for a whole host of reasons. But I have to talk about that picture because I love what's on the board right there. And I like to try to impress on people I talk with that it's a very real thing. So Jeremy and I live in Houston with Jenny and David, and we work at Johnson Space Center every day, and we get to see this stuff. So Gateway, for much of my life, the idea of living at the moon was an idea. It's been on PowerPoint slides for a long, long time, but I like to impress on people the fact that it is becoming very, very real. Last week I was in the Yuma Desert, and I watched the final qualification drop test on Orion, which is the spaceship stuck to the back of that space station. This isn't a developmental test. This is the final qualification test for the man-rated system. It's there. It landed at my feet, and it is going to bring humans back from the moon in the next very few years. It's remarkable for me to think about that. We live in very exciting times. I like to say the future is here. It is.
Canadian technology is transforming the way in which we explore space. I think what's really exciting, you look back in 2004, we demonstrated remote telerobotic surgery with a simulated patient on the NASA Aquarius Undersea Research Habitat and a surgeon, Dr. Marin Barry in Hamilton, Ontario. We were able to do this simulating lunar delays. How would we deliver surgical procedures if we had an astronaut on the surface of the moon that needed care? What's truly remarkable is we can take that technology and have a patient in northern Canada, a patient in a different part of the world taken care of by a Canadian-based physician. So nowadays we talk about virtual clinical care, hospitals and operating rooms without walls, being able to reach out using technology to care for people in remote locations.
I think, go ahead, Karen. I'll add to all these wonderful comments. We have 9 people up here, 9 astronauts, a lot of attention. But there's a lot more that goes on in space. There's satellites up there looking back at the Earth to much better understand the Earth itself, look at climate, global warming, things like that. The satellites out there for communication where we can instantly talk to anyone all around the world. And then going on to manned programs and science programs to the planets and the moons, the lunar studies, is to get a much better understanding of the background of the Earth itself, so we have a much better understanding of what it is we're dealing with here. And that's all of what space offers as well.
Chris?
The technology enables, I think, the improvement of human life. But there is a moment that the folks here on the right have experienced, which will come free on the anvil soon, and that is where you're coming across the Pacific and you're coming up on the coast of North America, and in the distance you can see Vancouver Island and Victoria and Vancouver. And if your trajectory is just right, coming up from the south, in 10 minutes you can go from just south of Victoria, you race across the mountains, you come in between Calgary and Edmonton, you come up and across the prairies, you look down at the Great Lakes south of you, you go just south of James Bay, and you spit out of the country just south of the Maritimes, looking up to Newfoundland in the north, where Julie is today. And you can do that in 10 minutes. And to be able to see our country that way, the technology is really important. The benefits that it brings back are critical to the infrastructure of our society, but the beauty of it and the unity of it and our ability to see not just our own country as one place, but the whole world in 90 minutes, that perspective is new for humanity as well. And it's one of the really important side benefits for Canada and for the rest of the countries in space exploration.
Absolutely. I think another thing that people are really curious about is the changing role of the astronaut and how that's going to change in the future with long duration missions further from Earth, like on or around the moon or Mars. Can you talk a little bit about that changing role and what we should expect?
Most of us have flown in low Earth orbit on the shuttle or Soyuz vehicle or the International Space Station. And low Earth orbit is only 400 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. But Josh and Jenny are going to go deep space. And when I say deep space, I'm talking about a return to the moon. I'm talking about to an asteroid, visiting the moons of Mars, and then 20 years from now, we're going to be on the surface of Mars exploring. These are challenges for us because the journey to Mars is a 400 million kilometer journey, which means that the communication, the data telemetry is going to have a 20-minute delay from Earth to mission control to Mars. And similarly, resupply of consumables, air, water, cargo, clothes, food, things like that are going to be very limited or impossible. So, the role of astronauts is going to become more autonomous. We're going to need AI systems aboard a spacecraft. For those of you that are my age, you know HAL 9000 from 2001. For those of you younger, you know C-3PO from Star Wars. We're going to have to be able to interact with those kinds of computer systems in order to conduct our mission. And then if you saw Matt Damon in The Martian, MacGyver kind of skills in addition to robotics, EVA, but goddamn it, I'm going to make this thing happen type of MacGyver skills. Those are going to be essential for spaceflight of the future.
You know, both Chris and Bob here have spent almost 6 months each on the space station, and David's going to do the same thing. When look at a trip to Mars, it takes 6 months just to get there. You can't turn around until you've been there for 18 months, and it takes 6 months to come back. So we have to go from being able to support astronauts spending a few months in space when they have a resupply mission every now and then, to go on for a 2.5-year trip, and everything they need to use has to go with them when they go. And it's 2.5 years before you come back here. So it's a huge increment in the technology of supporting the people for that length of time and taking care of everything that people have to do for that 2.5 years.
Sorry. Another aspect that we have to consider is the psychological makeup of the person. It's one thing to go into low Earth orbit or beyond the International Space Station, which is in low Earth orbit, and you see that comforting presence of Earth there. And when you think, if you look up into the sky, look at Mars, and you see this tiny, tiny red dot, and imagine that you are going to go to Mars, and the Earth will be a similarly tiny, tiny little dot. And you will be, as Bjarne said, at least minimum of 6 months away from home when you do that. And you're going to be gone 2+ years. So I would say that, you know, if you ask astronauts would they like to go into space anytime for any kind of mission, they will not all necessarily say, yeah, I'll go on any mission. Because when we're talking about that kind of mission to Mars, I think it requires a person with a special makeup, somebody who is fully conscious and of the different kind of mission that entails, and it requires a special person.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, just the relationship with mission control will be different. As it is on shuttle and space station, you really feel like they're there with you. It's like an external observer making sure that you're doing everything right, and it's a very tight relationship. And the guys on the ground that are helping you are your best friends, and because you've been training with them for 3 or 4 years. And what I see is, as you go to the moon where there's a delay, they won't quite be there the same way, because it'll be a few seconds later. And on the way to Mars, the delay is even in the order of minutes. And so you end up becoming much more independent in your decision making. And I think that would be very exciting to be part of.
If I were the commander of that crew, as soon as the Earth started fading in the rearview mirror, I would get the crew together and say, we are no longer Earthlings. We are now Martians. That's who we are. We need to redefine our relationship with the planet that birthed us. But I think that psychological that Mark was talking about, the psychological side, it's going to be very difficult not having Earth, Mother Earth next to you, and it's going to be really important for that crew to define who they are as some of the most distant explorers in human history.
So there's a great opportunity for all of us to consider the fact that humans are a spacefaring species. We will go forward and explore space. We've had humans living permanently in space longer than some people in this audience have been alive, which is remarkable to think of. As Chris points out, when we go to Mars, we will have a permanent human presence on Mars. We'll rotate crews through there. So in fact, the lessons from the International Space Station, when you orbit the Earth and you see the beauty of our planet, you see all these different countries, and you realize there's no boundaries separating these countries. This is one incredible planet, and we work together in space on behalf of humanity, and we will continue to explore space as a spacefaring species. It will ultimately reach out and live on other planets within our solar system, and that will happen within our lifetime, and it's so exciting to see Canada and Canadians part of that.
I do want to give Jenny a chance to answer this question about the changing role of the astronaut.
Yeah, of course. Well, we've heard a lot from the astronauts on the stage about what flying in space has been like, but I can definitely speak to the technical skill requirement that you need. We still emphasize that heavily, but there's also an enormous emphasis on what was mentioned, which is resilience. So the idea of being further away from Earth, the communication system, having a leg, not having that friendly buddy, which is mission control with you all the time, that emphasis is certainly there in our training. An emphasis with closeness with your crew, getting along with one another, and really just being a resilient person who can not only meet the technical requirements and get the job done, but do it a very far away from home.
The next question is probably one of the most controversial questions, a question that, of course, many people ask. We're talking about going back to the moon, exploring Mars, and there are plenty of people here on Earth who ask the question, we have many issues here on Earth, many problems that need to be solved. Why is space exploration so important right now? I think just looking at all of you, you might all have an answer to this one, but feel free to jump in.
I think the most common question I get asked by children is how do you go to the bathroom in space? But the most common question I get asked by adults is this one here. And when I get that question, I often wish there was a switch on the wall that I could go to and turn off. And it would shut off all space assets that society benefits from. So if I could turn that switch off, we would lose telecommunications, voice, data, video. We lose weather forecasting that we all depended on. We looked at it this morning. We lose search and rescue. We lose monitoring of our natural resources. We lose a lot of robotic capabilities that we have in the country today. And we lose a lot of healthcare technologies as well if we turn that switch off. Obviously, we take it all for granted. We don't realize the benefits that investment in space is all about. So the Canadian Space Agency, 50 years ago, invested in some of these technologies back when it was new, and we benefit from it today. We invested in other technologies 25 years ago. We benefit from it today. So the lesson is we need to continue to invest in space exploration and development, and society will continue to benefit.
Yeah, I would add that, it's interesting. I grew up when I was on a farm, a young boy. We didn't rely on space. This has evolved over time. And we set up our infrastructure in Canada and now around the world to leverage space. Not because space is cool, but because it is the most economical way to deliver services around the entire planet. Or if you want to take the heartbeat of the planet, you want to have information, the best place to take the heartbeat of the entire planet is from space. Really the only place to do it. And to answer your question more specifically, I don't think anyone up here believes that space is the number one priority of humanity. There are more important things that we need to do. We obviously need to take care of one another. We just recognize that it is now an imperative for life on Earth. And like Bob said, if you turn it off now, we would lose so much. And it goes beyond that, even commerce. And we're so reliant on the GPS signal, it would stop our economy. And it would take us we'd have to develop a new way to do all these things. Could we do it? Yeah, it's survivable, but it wouldn't make sense.
In the mid-1860s, actually towards the end of the 1860s, William Leach, the first principal of Queen's University, a Canadian, described the principles of modern space travel. That is truly remarkable. When we had humans walk on the moon in 1969, the message was not so much that we set foot on the moon, we set eyes on the Earth. And the true lessons and the benefits to humanity of space exploration are not only technological, they help us all understand how we can live together on Earth, how we can collaborate on international projects to further explore space, and do that in a manner of peaceful collaboration and cooperation. Certainly, if you look at the images from the Apollo program of the Earth and think about how those images stimulated planetary change and our awareness of protecting the environment for future generations, it's really hard to measure all of these, but I think Canada has been a major spacefaring nation and a strong contributor globally, right literally from the beginning of the program and the first description of human space travel.
Yeah, there's different levels or different ways to look at this. So just imagine that you're all out on a spacewalk, on EVA and extravehicular activity, and it's harsh out there. If you face the sun, it's plus 125 degrees. On my backside, it's minus 110 degrees. So, I mean, we have fancy underwear that keeps us at the right temperature. But also, you're carrying your own oxygen, you're carrying your own systems, you're carrying your own propulsion. And then just, if you want to think philosophically for just a second, compare that to the Earth. The Earth is incredibly fragile, especially the atmosphere. We had an experiment where we were measuring how the Earth breathed out during the day and then breathed in at night. And the dynamic interchange of oxygen on the surface of that atmosphere is quite fragile. And in addition, we're in front of our beach, if you like, is this huge geometric storm where we're deflecting particles all the time. And so flying into space actually does have a major mission, and that is our major, and to me, you can think of it, if you think philosophically, we are learning how to live out there, which teaches us how to live on Earth, and consequently we're moving towards a sustainable Earth on the long term, not just in the next 100 years. And space exploration teaches us that, and I think this is very critical to the whole thing.
A question for you, Jenny, in terms of being a role model, especially for young girls who are interested in science and engineering. Why is this important to you?
I think it's very important to me, the idea of having a role model, because I benefited from that so much during my early career and even before that when I was a kid. So I've always thought spaceflight was inspiring. If you think about what we've really done, if you think back even to the Apollo program, that's incredible. We assembled something the size of a skyscraper with the precision of a watch. We accelerated it to the speed of a bullet, and we sent it 250,000 miles away. And we did that multiple times, and we brought everybody back home. And that really changed, I think, what people thought was possible. And that extended to spaceflight following. But the really impactful thing for me was when I saw someone who was similar to me kind of push the bounds of what we knew. And that was Roberta Bondar, Canada's first female astronaut. I was very young at the time when she flew, and I don't think I quite realized how impactful that was. But I remember my mom making a really, really big deal of her mission. I remember taking news clippings of it. I remember listening to Julie Payette later on. And I think that seeing someone who was similar to me in that role was not only inspiring, but motivating. And that is what took me further and further in my career. And I think that that's true regardless of whether you want to be an astronaut, an engineer, a social worker, an economist, an artist, because human spaceflight is inspiring. But when you can get someone who is similar to you in that role, I just think that the emphasis skyrockets. It's incredible. So that's why I think role models are particularly important, and it's important for the Canadian Space Agency to increase in, diversity and visibility for that reason.
Before we get to the next question, I really kind of want to open this up to the other astronauts here today, because I think it's important to recognize that there are many young people who many of you can't see who are sitting in this corner today. Hello to everyone down there. I know there are some classes who are watching the live stream online, And I just think it's important for some of you to comment in terms of why these kids, you know, the next generation, should learn more about space exploration. What would you say to them, knowing that some of them are here, some of them are watching online?
I think space is really good about taking the letters I-M out of the word impossible. We like to say in space, we make the impossible possible. When I was growing up in the 60s in Canada, in Montreal, West Island, I was told it was impossible for me to become a Canadian astronaut. I've flown in space twice, done 3 spacewalks. What's truly remarkable about all this, and you know, one of the proudest moments of my life, was stepping onto the Canadarm. Chris has had a chance to ride the arm as well. You move away from the International Space Station. You've got the Canadian flag on your shoulder, the Canadian logo on the upper part of the arm, the Canadian logo on the lower part of the arm. I remember hovering over the payload bay of the space shuttle with the Canadarm in the payload bay of the space shuttle and the boom and sensor system. More Canadian logos than any other country that was in space. And you think, this is incredible. This is absolutely amazing. So the message for the younger people in the audience is, yes, space is all about making the impossible possible. Find those dreams that you have and go after them with everything you have. And who knows what can come true.
Yeah, to pick up on what David said, children love hearing about space. And the reason they love hearing about space is because they still have imagination. And I remember telling somebody when I first went up into space that I became a child again. And I say that because as you grow up, I don't know whether it's our schools or our parents, but they kind of say, look, now you have to become a serious person. You have to deal with reality. And gradually that imagination is suppressed in us, and we grow up to be serious adults. And of course, astronauts are supposed to be serious adults. When we go into space, we have some very important things to do up there. And I remember when I first arrived up there and the absolute wonder of the experience, I felt like I was rediscovering something that I had when I was a child, which was my imagination. I was giggling. I was just totally awed by what I was experiencing. And that is such a precious thing. I wish that we could all hold on to our imaginations as we grow up, because I think if we could, we would accomplish so much more.
I relate my personal story, or part of it. Back in October 1957, I was 12 years old, living in a small city in northern British Columbia. No television back then in that city anyhow, hardly even a radio station. And then on October 4th, we woke up to the news that there was a satellite orbiting the Earth. And it just hit the news like crazy and affected a lot of people. For me, what it did, living in that little town, not seeing much of the rest of the world, was I don't have to be limited by what happens to be around me. And I've taken that attitude all throughout my career. You can do things that you may not see around you, but you can do them if you go after them. And that has taken me through. I watched the early part of the space program when Yuri Gagarin flew right up until Neil Armstrong flew, considered running away to the US when I was 15 years old, becoming an American, joining the Air Force, becoming a pilot, on and on and on. Then I decided, no, I like Canada, stayed here, but I happened to do all the right things by going after doing things that took me beyond what my family may have been doing or my friends may have been doing, and that eventually brought me around to becoming lucky enough to be one of the first Canadian astronauts, and that's taken me through it. So I always look at, if you want to go after doing things, you can go after them. It takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of effort, you can do it. And you don't have to be limited by what happens to be around you today. And going, exploring space, you know, we have the Earth, we have its challenges, global warming, etc. Space gives you an absolute great way to look back at the Earth, understand it. Looking further out to other planets gives us a much better understanding of how worlds work, how planets work. And right now, there's been satellites that have detected something on the order of 5,000 planets out there someplace. And studying all of those will give us a much better understanding of the Earth that we live in. And we can go after all of this. And it's a great future for all these young folks sitting over here in the corner.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like the sentiment, I guess, of curiosity as a virtue. I was not 12 in 1957, but I had a childhood. And when I think about it, the one thing that's present in every memory I have is personally this overwhelming sense of curiosity and wanting to go farther and look behind everything, and just this enduring curiosity. I think that's the reason for everything, most of what I've done in my life. It's the reason for why I'm here right now, maybe more than anything. But I also think that it goes to the question we were talking about earlier with why space is important. You know, fundamentally, human space exploration is about curiosity, and I sometimes think that it is easy to sit on a stage and talk about what space is going to cost us with technology and with innovation or with AI, with the economy. But it's impossible, it seems to me, looking back, it's impossible to forecast what it's going to bring us, and it never ceases to surprise us. And that, to me, is why we do it. It's curiosity, and it's the fact that it's very difficult to pinpoint what we're going to pull out of this great adventure, but it's going to be good. And that's what makes us human, is doing that.
So we're going to take questions in a couple minutes. Just one more final question for all of you. Here on Earth, we see tensions between countries, even between allies. How was that overcome for space exploration, especially with the International Space Station, where astronauts from different cultures live and work together?
I think the adage that the enemy of my enemy is my friend has really played out in spaceflight, in that access to space is really difficult, and the enemy is the complexity of it. It is impossible to get to space by yourself. You're going to at least need a team of experts, and on the scale of your access to space, it's going to be driven by the size of your team of experts. And right from the very beginning, in the effort to get to the moon, the United States was counting on Canada, the technology, the people that were involved, in order to be able to do that thing. We were international from the beginning. And as Mark said, Canada was the third nation on Earth in space, but not alone. We did it in cooperation with other countries. And I think that's played itself out in a way that seems almost impossible on the International Space Station. Countries that were bloodily at war with each other within the memory of my parents. The Second World War, we thought the best way to resolve that, the human dispute, was to kill 70 million of each other. And that's what we did in the Second World War. But as another way to resolve dispute is to have some sort of common, almost impossible purpose, and recognize that the only way we're going to solve that is to work on it together. And the space station is extremely improbable. It flies in the face of history. It flies in the face of current and recent behavior. But at the same time, it flies. And Drew, Indy's husband, is up there right now as the commander. He's Canadian and American. He's got a crew from all around the world. David Saint-Jacques, who's the next Canadian to fly, he and his international crew are getting ready to go. And I think the space station is extremely technically valuable. It is teaching us the lessons not only of what we can learn on board, but how to go further. But in addition, anybody in the world basically can walk outside at dawn or dusk and watch this thing, the third brightest thing in the sky, go from horizon to horizon as an undeniable example of what we can do together when we do things right. And so I really think that component is very important.
Let me just add to that, because there's 5 main countries, but there's 11 from Europe. You add that up, I think that's 15. But there are approximately 80 countries that have contributed somehow to space stations. So there are 80 separate countries that are involved with space station. And for me, that makes space station an icon of hope that really can make a difference. Now, to follow up on what Chris is saying, if we take all the 5-year-olds in the world from those 80 countries, and they look at the space station that is brighter than Venus now, and it's easy to see in the sky, you don't have to find it, it shows itself, they can say, boy, we were a part of that. And I think that carries a lot of weight.
You know, as Canadians, we live the greatest lesson of the International Space Station. All of us live this on a day-to-day basis. Canada is a country that celebrates and welcomes diversity. Canada is a country that celebrates different cultures coming together, all of us uniquely as Canadians, to be able to live an experience that's truly remarkable. When I was in the space program for 16 years, I worked with people from all over the world. different cultures, different backgrounds, who spoke multiple different languages. Some, in fact, may have been former enemies. And what I learned is that one-on-one, people are truly remarkable. We can get along with anybody, anywhere in the world. Working together as teams, we shared the passion for exploring space. And that passion unifies everybody. And it unifies us to do something that's better and bigger than all of us, which is truly something really, really incredible. And it's one of the things that I took away. But I think one of the things that I'm very proud of is to say, yes, I'm Canadian, and those are the values that we have as a country.
One of our astronaut colleagues from another country once said something that resonated with me, and he said that, you know, the first day that he was up in space, he looked down at the planet and he looked for his home country, and he pointed it out to his crewmates. And after 3 days, he was aware of his continent. And then after a week in space, he was only aware of one Earth. And I sort of experienced that as well. You know, so after a week or so that I was in space, I was still proud to be Canadian, but my Canadian citizenship sort of went on the back burner, and I felt like I was a member of humanity, one planet. And the reason for that is because we're working on, as Dave said, something bigger than ourselves in the setting of international collaboration. And we're touring the Earth once every 90 minutes as well, so it gives you that feeling. Looking out, you see the natural ecosystem, and it's clear to see the interaction between the ocean, between the air, between the freshwater cycle, the flora and the fauna. It's all connected. Smoke plumes from a forest fire in Siberia track all the way across to Canada and affect the quality of our air. Everything is one. We're all connected. And I think spaceflight helps us to engender that mindset. And I think every decision maker, every human being needs to go to space for 3 days and just look out the window.
That's a great way to wrap things up. We do have a few minutes to take some questions, so if people would line up the microphone, please do it. Just line up single file. We'll take a couple questions. While you do that, I do want to ask, we just had a photo that was up there. If someone could just kind of walk us through that picture, if we could pull it back up, if that would be okay.
So I'm in that photograph at the very bottom, at the 6 o'clock position. At the 5 o'clock position is my good friend, Julie Payette. So in July of 2009, it was the first time in the 25-year history of the Canadian astronaut program that 2 Canadians had the opportunity to fly in space. So we have 6 members of the International Space Station crew. Again, it's representing 5 different countries. And then Julie Payette's space shuttle crew there as well. I think there might have been, if you do the numbers, might be 13 people there, which might have been the largest number of people in space at one time as well. So proud of Julie Payette. She's a wonderful individual to know as a friend, but she made me so proud. On orbit, she operated the Canadarm on the space shuttle, the Canadarm2 on the space station, and also the Japanese robotic arm to do some incredible assembly work.
And she was the flight engineer of the space shuttle on that flight too.
Big responsibility. So just Julie's superb.
Excellent. So I just got word that we only have time for 2 questions, so I apologize if you're not first or second in line, but thank you for your patience. Oh, it looks like we have a young group coming up.
Looks like your microphone's too tall.
Yeah, we'll turn the microphone. There you go. What's your question?
Okay, so my question is, what happens if someone has like a medical thing like appendicitis or something and they need to get operated on fast? What happens?
Great question.
Doctors?
Yeah. You ask the doctor on board, help! So it's a great question. If we were going to go to Mars, do you take out somebody's appendix before you go? So we're in the process now of developing these clinical procedures to take care of people if they get sick in space. When I was on my first space flight, we actually experimented with doing surgery in space. And these are the sorts of lessons we need to learn to become a spacefaring species and stay longer.
On board the space station right now, we have medical equipment, scalpels, all of the sort of a little pharmacy. We actually have a place you can strap a patient down if somebody's sick, so that you could do something. If they got really sick, we'd probably be better off to get into the little Russian ship and come home. But for a lot of things, we get training. For a lot of crews, you have a doctor like Dave or Bob on board, but for some crews you don't. So you get medical training so that you can take care of someone if they got sick. Hopefully no appendicitis, but eventually that will happen, of course. And we just have, on the way to Mars, you got to take it out. That's the way it is.
Great question. I have just got worried we have time for 2 more questions. So the kids got the bonus question.
Would you guys want to go to Mars if you got the chance, or would you think it would be way too dangerous and no, I wouldn't want to go?
Go to Mars?
Yeah,
Josh, let's ask Josh.
I didn't. I'm not sure I heard it
You
all,
wanna go to
but
Mars?
I heard going to Mars and would I, and yes.
Yeah, so I was in a conference earlier this year, and Elon Musk was the lunch speaker. And somebody asked him the question about going to Mars, and he said, right now, it would be a one-way trip. We don't have a way to get there and get back. So you'd have to think about that a little bit. Maybe in another 5 years, I'd go on the one-way trip, but I wouldn't right now. But if you guarantee a two-way trip, yeah, I'd go to Mars in a blink. Yeah.
Great. And one more question.
Hi everyone, thanks for doing this today. My name is Alex. I work with an organization called Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, or CEDS Canada. So on behalf of my colleagues at CEDS Canada, they wanted to ask you guys a question about your thoughts on what the CSA or even industry specialists and people in the space industry can do, what they should do to work with post-secondary students in Canada towards the development of space and our space industry. Thank you.
I think it's really important as a young Canadian to see a path that maybe wasn't there in the past that is now available to you. We have done our best. We've risked our lives multiple times in order to try and push the very edge of what is possible for Canadians. It's what we're going to ask David Saint-Jacques to do on December 19th. It's what Jeremy and Jenny and Josh will be doing. But I think the key to that is once you have pushed that door open, it remains open for all Canadians from that moment on. And they see it as an opportunity. And you start deciding who you're not going to be pretty early in life if you don't see an example that shows that this is a possibility. And so I think what you're doing with CEDS, which is terrific, I think letting school students, whether high school or younger, see that this is actually part of the fabric of Canadian opportunity, that there are Canadians doing these things, and that the pace of invention is accelerating. Things will never be this slow again. And so don't put a limit of impossibility onto to what you think you can be just because of where we are right now. We are living evidence of that, but it's only going to become more open. But you have to get those examples into the eyes and minds of young Canadians as early as possible so that they start making different decisions of who they might someday be.
And I would add that there's 3 very, very exciting things that will happen before the end of this year. We all know about David Saint-Jacques, who is going to go up into space for about 6.5 months. And I think when David is up there, he will interact a lot with people on Earth. So that will be very, very visible and very, very good. Secondly, we have a spacecraft. It's not a Canadian one, but we're contributing to it, called OSIRIS-REx, that is on its way to an asteroid. And it has a very important sensor on it called a LiDAR, which is Canadian, and which will do a 3D mapping of this asteroid called Bennu, and that will determine where this asteroid will take a sample to bring back to Earth. So Canada is involved with that. That's extremely exciting, and that's going to happen in early December. And thirdly, we have 3 spacecraft that are going to be launched all on the same rocket. In fact, it's an Elon Musk rocket, sometime later this fall, called the RadarSat Constellation Mission. This is really exciting. It's an area where Canada is the world leader. And if we can tell people about these events that are important and excite them about it, I think we'll accomplish some of what you're looking for.
I think from our perspective, the message that says, you guys are doing incredible things already. And that's fantastic in and of itself. Realize that all of us were once where you are today. And I didn't think I was ever going to become an astronaut. So what I learned in the process, it's all about persistence, resilience, and having relentless optimism that yes, this too will work out, and you may get a chance to go forward and represent Canada exploring space. You might get a chance to be an engineer, aerospace engineer. Others in the audience may be part of the future of Canada's role in space, and that's really, really exciting.
So to wrap it up now, and we're going to take a couple of quick photos on stage. I ask that everybody be seated, but before we do that, please, a big round of applause for all of our astronauts. Thank you so much.